A good Friday to everybody, and welcome to the Moses Kotane virtual lecture. We're hosting virtual lectures on every Friday. Today, we are looking at the industrial sustainability 4.0, a resilience and digital economy. It is delivered by our colleague, Mr. Nisa Mohammed. He has worked for the Department of Economic Development, Tourism, and Environmental Affairs with responsibilities for film and green economy. Prior to that, he had worked for the National Union of Metal Workers in South Africa. He's currently serving at the Trade and Investment KZN, which is our sister entity, as a sector manager and is responsible for green economy and knowledge economy. MKI is very excited to have him join us today and give us this lecture. Over to you, Mr. Mohammed.
Okay, good afternoon, Bongiwe, and thank you so much to the colleagues at MKI for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you on this very pressing topic today. And since I've only got 15 minutes, let me get cracking. Let's hope this works. Okay. Oh, goodness. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can. Can continue.
Okay, cool. Right. Let me start. Okay. In the time that it took me to set this up, okay, which is about 10 seconds, this is what happened in the world of the digital economy. Okay, Facebook had a profit of $2,500, Amazon a profit of about $23,000, Google $17,000, and Apple $54,000. So from a 4-hour point of view, when you look at it, these are all the poster children of the fourth industrial revolution. So it seems pretty impressive. Okay. However, also in 10 seconds, 19 children were born into poverty, 480 tons of food was wasted, and 3 people died of starvation. So this is, for me, what I regard as the paradox between what we see as the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution and what's also happening in the world at large. And hopefully these are some of the solutions which 4R is supposed to be addressing. And in order to get a better handle on this is what's happened in the past millennium. So life expectancy has more than doubled since 1900. Integrated circuits since 1960 has become 30,000 times faster, and solar panels have become about 250 times cheaper. Okay. Now, again, part of a lot of the discussions around 4R concerns the choices that we've got to make. And here in KwaZulu-Natal, we are faced with specific choices. So I'll give you a simple example. Assuming you're a councillor in a particular place, a peri-urban or a rural community, and you know for a fact that there are more cell phones in the community, more people have got access to cell phones than have got access to a toilet. Okay, what do you actually prioritize as a council or as a politician? And a large part of the discussion that we've been having in TIKZN and just generally in provincial government has been, how do we begin to look at the fourth industrial revolution as a sector that we should take advantage of and leverage of, knowing full well what the actual conditions are on the ground that people are dealing with. And that is why I, tongue-in-cheek, called it industrial sustainability, because essentially I really do think that the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution have got to cascade to the broader society, and not only benefit a few that have got access to broadband and Wi-Fi and stuff like that. Now, ever since 4R came onto the agenda about 3 or 4 years ago with the World Economic Forum at Davos, they've been printing out this little future production series. And these are the key emerging technologies that they predicted will either be available now or in the very near future, in which they are saying countries need to start bracing themselves and get involved in. And a large part of the issue with regards to this future production is how do countries capacitate themselves to make sure that they're deriving these benefits. So when a study was done globally of about 100 countries, if you look at the bottom left corner, this is where South Africa was. We were in the bottom left corner, which is in the nascent category, which by African standards was pretty good in the sense that South Africa was voted the top of all the countries in Africa there. But where we really want to be is in the leading category or in the high potential category. And as you can see, of the G20 countries that were in this, the bulk of them are responsible for about 80% of global manufacturing value add. And that's what we want to be part of. So again, when we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, one of the issues we've got to be very clear about is exactly where as a country we are in the global scheme of things and how we can benefit from this. Now, this is where things get a bit controversial, okay? Because by and large, there are going to be material needs when we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, or what we call future technology. And I'll just share a few of these with you, okay? So they say your radio frequency identification tags, there'll be up to 85 trillion will be in use by 2035. Now, for that large figure, you're going to need huge reserves of silver, copper, and aluminium. Everybody's been talking about robots. When robots really do begin to take over, you're going to need steel, copper, tin, and silicon. Now, the issue here is where does all of this come from, and at what cost do all of these does this come? Now, we don't want a situation where yet again Africa is only seen as the producer of these raw materials and we're importing the robots and Eurofid tags from everywhere else. In order for us to completely benefit from the fourth industrial revolution, we've got to also be mining the product and manufacturing it and hopefully also exporting it. And the organization that I work for is very keen to make sure that not only do we leverage the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution, but we also do export a lot of these things rather than just the raw materials. Now, a large part of the discussion on the fourth industrial revolution also talks about something which has become quite common now, namely the transition to a low carbon economy. And I think colleagues are fairly familiar with this, so I'm not going to go into too many details of it, except to say that in one aspect of it, namely the technological part of it, there are going to be fairly significant areas that we're going to see 4IR playing a fairly large role. So the one obviously is the one that we're all talking about now is in terms of energy. But 4IR is also going to play a role into mining, into mobility when we look at the growth of electric vehicles, and also with regards to infrastructure materials. However, there is a dark side to all of this, okay? And part of that is that digital technologies globally have almost as much carbon dioxide emissions as the aviation industry. Now, there's been a bit of a dispute between your ICT industries and the aviation when this study was shown. But I mean, essentially, what we are finding increasingly is your data centers use a lot of electricity, which is well and good. But the issue is, what electricity are they using and where are they deriving that from? So for instance, in 2017, the entire Bitcoin network used as much power as the Republic of Ireland. The bulk of that was fossil fuel based. So already you're beginning to see a bit of a disjuncture between 4IR on the one hand that is perceived as this panacea, as the solution, but it's using the same sorts of fossil fuels that's causing a large part of the pollution and the problems that we are still faced with in the developing world. And that is something that we feel needs to change and change quite soon. And this is where arguments are that some of this change is going to be. So I've said this particular slide is from donuts to resource use. Now, essentially, there's a new framework that's coming about in terms of how we should perceive the role of economic development within society. And I think if I were to ask anyone in the audience to name any keen economist from this current millennium, you'll battle to think of any of the great economists. And the reason for that is the economic models that we're dealing with are 100 years old. The people that developed these economic models developed this more than 150 years old. You know the people I'm talking about: Schumpeter, Polanyi, Marx, Milton Friedman, all those people. The issue is, why aren't we looking at economic models for this millennium, this current millennium? And when we begin to do that, we'll find that essentially the way the Earth is structured, there's about 10 ecological factors currently in place, and we've exceeded 3 of them. One of them, probably the most important one, is climate change. And once we begin to erode more and more of that, the other one is biodiversity, and then nitrogen, the nitrogen cycle in agriculture. The minute we begin to use more and more of that, the less chances we are going to get to actually reap the benefits of the fourth or any industrial revolution that we hope to be part of. We've also got to remember that revolutions 1, 2, and 3 did not benefit the African continent. In fact, the African continent suffered as a result of those revolutions. And what we would see for the fourth industrial revolution is some sort of benefit. Okay, which now brings me to the issue that I want to address in terms of where do I see the actual marriage, and that's going to be with what we call the circular economy and its marriage with new technology. And there's 3 areas there. The first is with regards to product design, and here we're looking at products that last longer, that there's a possibility of it being reused or recycled. In terms of process design, you're going to minimize waste. And then in terms of the business models, there's this whole big move now globally to prosumers, where you're looking at renting stuff rather than buying stuff. And again, the discussion in the fourth industrial revolution is quite apposite in this regard, because now we're looking at things as a service, fashion as a service, mobility as a service, which is what led to the rise of Uber, accommodation as a service, which is what led to the rise of B&Bs. And we are arguing that this can all be underpinned and is currently all underpinned by the technology enablers that you find in the fourth industrial revolution, such as 3D printers, platforms, big data, and the like. Now, you can't talk, and I did make a reference to the huge energy, how energy intensive the fourth industrial revolution is. So you can't talk about being a country that's receptive to the fourth industrial revolution without having a discussion on South Africa's energy crisis. And this is a graph that I've got that looks at the predictions up until this current year, and you can see the price of electricity is going up. So already there's going to be some sort of decoupling between our aspirations for the fourth industrial revolution on the one hand and our energy costs on the other, because something is we're going to need to sustain whatever it is that we want in the growth of the fourth industrial revolution. We've had huge interest in things like data centers. Data centers eat up a lot of electricity. Electricity is expensive. How are we going to afford to get data center investments in our province when we can't guarantee there won't be load shedding and we can't guarantee a low electricity price? Another thing to be concerned about in the South African context is currently, and I won't go into too much detail in this particular slide, that 20% of South Africa's manufacturing capacity is currently not being used. This is of particular concern because increasingly it seems that that number is going to increase even more. So all indications are that unless we get things on place with regards to manufacturing, we'll be utilizing even less of our manufacturing capacity, which makes inroads into the fourth industrial revolution a bit difficult. Okay, so my last 2 slides, I'm just going to try to bring this home to something that I think we will be familiar with. Now, everybody that's participating in this thing this afternoon, we've all got one thing in common. I hope we're all wearing clothing, okay? And this is what's happened in the world of the fashion industry of late. It takes about 20,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram of cotton. And in 2015, the fashion industry used 79 billion liters of water. And the facts that I've got on this table will give you some indication of how intensive, from a natural resource point of view, the fashion industry is. And the solutions that we're finding in the fourth industrial revolution are here. I won't go into all the minute details of this, except to say that the challenge that's been drawn up by the fashion industry has been met by and large not only by your outliers, but we're also seeing major fashion houses beginning to use some of the things that I've mentioned here, where, for instance, a company called Orange 5 in Italy, they extract cellulose from orange rinds to produce a silk-like material that's being used on the ramps of Milan as we speak. Okay, blockchain has also been used in the fashion industry, for instance, to provide end-to-end digital histories of all raw materials used in the industry, from shearing of sheep to the final product. And there's numerous examples where you're seeing the fashion industry looking at some of the problems that is inherent in them being a viable concern and using the fourth industrial revolution as potential solutions for it. And some of the problems are pretty horrendous. I mean, the fashion industry, after oil, is the second biggest polluting industry in the world. And then to end off with food. Food is one of the biggest economies that we have currently. It's got the annual GDP of about 8 trillion. which is 10% of the world's GDP, and it employs 1 billion people. However, 33% of the food that is produced goes to waste, and every night 900 million people on the planet go hungry to bed. They go to bed hungry. Now, one of the solutions, and this is not touted as the only solution, but one of the solutions is to take the same technology that you find in a cow, which is able to transform protein, sugars, and fats to present what you eventually get as a burger or milk, to take that same technology and to use it to make food. And what is used there is yeast, which is fermented, and often it is fermented using 3D printed DNA sequences to provide the sort of meat that we find in that burger. So it's essentially making a meat without cows, number one, and you're also getting a situation where people are able to make yolk or egg yolk without the need for hens. And I've only had 15 minutes, and this is one of the ways in which I was hoping to give you some indication of some of the problems that are inherent in the fourth industrial revolution, some of the challenges that it will find and face as it begins to ramp up, especially in the developing world, and also hopefully share with you some of the solutions that we could possibly find as well. And I think the challenge for us in the developing world, especially the challenge for us in KZN, is not just to see the fourth industrial revolution as the panacea and the solution to everything, but rather to begin to find ways in which we can get the fourth industrial revolution and some of the technologies embedded in the fourth industrial revolution to work for us and to provide solutions to the bulk of our population. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed, on such an insightful and yet very interesting concepts coming through, and very interesting statistics that is coming through, especially when you're talking about manufacturing and the fact that manufacturing has not been used. If you kindly just delve onto that and kindly just explain to us the issue of manufacturing, given the fact that we are faced with COVID and we are looking at technology as solutions, what can be done in the space on manufacturing, and how can we then leverage the opportunities of OIR with manufacturing so that A, jobs can be created, B, we grow the economy that has been hard hit by COVID.
Okay. Now, thank you very much for that. I suppose the quickest answer with regards to COVID, and to give you a sense of where we stand on the manufacturing base with regards to COVID, is if you look at all the funding that's been made available, okay, since the pandemic broke and since we've begun as government to begin to take this seriously, we should ask ourselves how many apps have been developed in the past month and a half to look at dealing with this particular pandemic, and how have they been developed, and who are they benefiting, and compare what's going on in South Africa to the rest of the world in terms of the app development. I think this gives you a good indication of the potential there is to begin to address a particular problem, number one, but also that sort of challenge that we have now. One of the big apps that they were talking about was the track and trace thing that goes into cellular telephones. And I know there has been some discussion about that in South Africa. I'm not too sure how far we've gone with that, but that would have been a perfect example, an opportunity for entrepreneurs to be given the necessary funding and the necessary opportunities to begin to get on board there. Now, the issue with manufacturing in South Africa, it's a very contested one, and there's many reasons for underutilization of manufacturing. And the statistic I showed you was a 2018 one, I think. Part of it had to do with energy availability. The other part had to do with the uptake of new skills and new technologies. Because we've been quite slow in that particular uptake, we've been perceived by and large as lagging behind some of the developments in the developed world, in the first world in particular, in terms of the adoption of some of the technologies. However, there are indications, and you don't have to go very far from where the MKI office is currently, to see examples of engineering companies in the Umhlanga region that's using the bulk of our technologies, from augmented reality to virtual reality, to look at the work that's been done by about 2 or 3 large engineering companies in the Umhlanga area, which I was quite fortunate to visit, just to see 4R in operation there. I do think we are going to have a problem unless we begin to address the issue of STEM, the uptake of that in terms of school and in the tertiary sector, because it's one thing to talk of 4R, but what we actually really need to do is have the people that are operating the machines that makes 4R a reality. And what we want to do in South Africa is to make sure that the cohort of students that are now entering high school are already thinking in the next 5 or 6 years of 4R related technologies. Those 12 emerging technologies that I showed you earlier, those should be the careers that they should be heading towards. And they should be in grade 6 or 7 right now and should be thinking those careers in much the same way that when we were in grade 6 or 7, we were thinking of becoming lawyers and doctors and teachers and the like. So it's a huge mind shift change.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed. Another question that came through was about the new economic models. As you explained that we are still very much based on the old economic models, and there's not much shift, or there's not been any shift within the paradigms of economics till now. In your view, what could be the reasons of the lack of new theories? Is it because of graduates coming out of universities not being involved in theory making or in models making, or is it the fact that everybody's comfortable with the old economic models?
I think it's a case of both. I think people are comfortable with the old economic models to some extent because it gives them something to fall back on. But I do think, and we're seeing increasingly now, there are challenges to what we're seeing from an economic theory point of view. And you've just got to see, for instance, I think the Financial Times about 3 or 4 weeks ago did this article on major economists of the world. 5 of them, they were looking at, the bulk of them were women. Okay, the one, for instance, is actually on our President Ramaphosa's 4R commission, and she's looking specifically at funding for 4R applications and looking at the role that the state has played historically in funding a lot of the applications that we've taken for granted, from the cell phone to the electric vehicle. All of that has been funded by the state. So you're getting new economists who are actually beginning to challenge these paradigms as to what is the role of the state. Is the state's role simply to fund things and then sit back while the big pharmaceutical companies buy the patents? So I think what we are seeing, what is quite interesting, unfortunately at this stage they are not household names, but you are seeing a generation of economists who are graduating in this millennium, who are beginning to shake things up, and they're saying, well, look, why should we be in slavery to economists that were around 200 years ago who did not even predict this 4R model that we are currently involved in. And I also begin to think as well that in terms of the way we are funding a lot of projects, we are also beginning to consider the fact that maybe new models should be in place. And I think, if you just look at the role, for instance, that your organization MKI plays, how you've streamlined your funding for patents and stuff like that, that's all thinking towards a new economic model, which is bringing new entrepreneurs into the market, which is very different to the models that were around 20 or 30 years ago, where entrepreneurs, people involved in patenting, did not even get a look in.
Thank you very much. We had a question from Anonymous, who has asked, how has COVID-19 affected the KZN production? I think it goes back to manufacturing. If there has been any look at that, if you are able to answer that, please.
COVID, well, it's a bit difficult. I mean, obviously, when you had the shutdown, you had a huge stymieing of manufacturing activity in KwaZulu-Natal. But I think what we are beginning to see is a brief resurgence. My biggest concern, though, is that in KZN, our principal interest has been trying to resuscitate the SMME sector in manufacturing, to get it to grow and to get that sector to begin to export. And I think what COVID-19 has done has been to put that on the back foot. I do hope, though, that what we are beginning to see are some shoots from some of the sectors who are looking at different markets to begin to export. I mean, the biggest thing that COVID-19 has done, from a manufacturing point of view, it's made us rethink our partners in the global world. So, you've been producing something for a particular market. That market is now closed. You now have to be agile, which is, again, one of the hallmarks of the fourth industrial revolution. It's agile thinking. You don't do the same thing again and again and again and expect a different result. Now we're finding in KwaZulu-Natal manufacturers are increasingly looking for different markets for the same product, but without them having to feel beholden to whether it's China or the USA or the East Asian tigers and the like. Maybe markets can be in Africa for those particular products. And that's in TIKZN, that's the thing that we are seeing increasing in our people are coming to us with particular products for different markets and asking for assistance in that regard. I do think it's going to take a while, though, before we land on our feet, for no other reason other than the fact that what we have seen has been a complete rupturing of economic activity globally, and it's going to make interactions a bit more difficult.
Just to follow up on that, another one came from Anonymous. What do you think South Africa should do to recover its economy post-COVID-19? I mean, going back to the issue of the new circular economy brought in by 4IR, what could be done in resuscitating the South African economy?
Well, thank you. Look, the whole circular economy and resuscitation of global economies has come to the fore now. So, one of the things that we have been encouraging people, especially in circular economy thinking, has been to begin to look at the real cost of production, and the life cycle cost as well, and not to simply think of the old linear style of you extract something from the ground, you make it, and then you get rid of it once you've used it. And essentially, from a circular economy point of view, we are looking at things of making products not only to last longer, but that they stay in circulation for much longer and derive much more benefit. So I'll give you a good example of what we are seeing in KwaZulu-Natal already. Making use, for instance, of our sugar industry. The sugar industry produces a fair amount of waste in the form of a thing called bagasse. That is then utilized to make bricks. And these are not bricks for low-income houses or anything like. These are bricks that can stand the test of time with any sort of infrastructure that you care to mention. And that's one example of where you're getting circular economy thinking, where you're using sugarcane waste, okay, to produce bricks for construction. And there's a range of those that we are beginning to look at in KwaZulu-Natal. And what's been quite interesting is that we're actually taking something that invariably is thrown away. That bagasse ends up as huge mountains of waste in sugar mills, and we're saying there should be another way to utilize it. And we're seeing that increasingly in the agricultural world in KwaZulu-Natal, where people are not only thinking of what you can produce with that waste, but you can also use that waste to generate electricity, you can through cogeneration or ethanol. And that again is an example of circular economy thinking, which again is becoming quite current in KwaZulu-Natal.
Thank you very much. I think the previous three industrial revolutions were underpinned by technology, energy, and transportation. And we're beginning to see that again with the fourth industrial revolution, with such a disruptive nature when it comes to technology. And again, with energy going to green energy and transportation taking a very, very different dimension. Do you then believe that our industries are able to absorb the 4IR, or that the sustainability of 4IR and the resilience of a South African economy, do you really believe that we are ready, and can we sustain Industry 4.0 given our current context within South Africa and KZN?
Yeah, look, it's a difficult one. I think industry has to make a choice. You can't be talking the 4R language, but still being relying on old paradigms that sustained industry previously. If we are talking 4R, we've got to think of a decoupling, both in terms of how we use the resources and how we power our industries. I'm not saying it's an either or situation, but at some point down the future, we have to start thinking of things like that, especially when you look at electricity costs that we have currently. It's also no surprise that the poster children of the fourth industrial revolution, whether it's Amazon or Google or the like, they insist on a certain level of renewable energy generation for their plants, because they cannot afford not to have control of energy as an input in their production processes. And I mean, we are seeing some companies in South Africa and in KwaZulu-Natal who are beginning to think along those lines. The main thing, though, is that for us not to fall into the trap of thinking the fourth industrial revolution is only IT or only ICT. It's actually a whole range of things that we need to consider. And one of them, obviously, is resource use, which is why it's no surprise that this year at Davos, the World Economic Forum, when they were looking at the issues of risk and resilience, looked at all the climate change and resource-based things. I think those were the top 5 issues that the World Economic Forum looked at. And the more South African companies begin to think that language and begins to think along green manufacturing, I think the more productive we will be in the near future. The old paradigm suited a particular point in time. I think it is time now for a new paradigm. And the fact that we've got a young population in KwaZulu-Natal, they will probably be more receptive to a new paradigm.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed. That makes the end of our lecture for today, as we are looking at industrial sustainability 4.0, resilient and the digital economy. Please join us next week, as we will be receiving a lecture on renewable energy, interesting enough, but with special reference to rural biogas. Please tune in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.